the one you mentioned in the curriculum. Maybe as the administration asks themselves, why should I do this? What's the importance? I think that's the challenge, to know if the administrators really want to do that. If not, students then must rely on NGOs, on community groups that are really doing their work. And I think that us as journalists really need that class too.
I would say that, and this one doesn't work. The one with the red light. So, I would say in Mariana, one of the things that we started doing is a community-driven emergency plan, community-led emergency plan. And to our knowledge, our process, the process that we went through, was one of the first communities that was able to do that in partnership with designers and people that were really lending their skills as well. But it was such an important process of power for the community. And what I would suggest is that in the future, this type of activity would lend itself nicely to students partnering, being part of it, and really for students from K to 12 to be able to have access to these types of skills. I mean, we don't have a developmentally appropriate curriculum for what it would take to respond to a disaster. And kids, you can prepare kids to be ready to manage and navigate extreme uncertainty, but we still haven't figured that out. When I hear about universities getting data for emergency plans, what I experience is that the community was already doing it because it mattered to them, and that's more powerful. So how can universities partner with communities to continue to strengthen their efforts, their existing efforts?
I have comments on all three. On the university one, the question you asked the student, I don't know if there should be a course on student being prepared or whatever, but I think there should be a growing role in the education of say, undergraduates in terms of understanding, unless we don't take, there's two choices. If we take seriously what a growing number of scientists from all kinds of disciplines tell us, the life in the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years is going to have a lot more challenges than we're dealing with right now, never mind what we're dealing with right now. So I think there needs to be a growing education so that the next generation can be better informed and better able to sort out solutions and establish priorities and do all of these things that we're talking about. Regarding the individual versus collective action, I mean, that's always a trade-off, because yes, if individuals leave everything to others, you never get enough traction. But in this whole environmental debate and all that, I mean, one can also have too much focus on the individual as well. Like, you hear people say, well, I'm doing my part, I'm riding the bicycle, I'm eating less meat, and using less plastic, whatever. And that's great, and that's part of what everybody at some point needs to do. But that's not going to help if we just think that, oh, I'll do my part and then I've done my share. Because collective action on a lot of things, especially on major issues that have to do with infrastructure and energy, those are not going to change just because on the margins we change our behavior. So it has to be both, because if everybody changes their behavior, that has an impact, and that's important. But I think both have to go. I mean, I think you're raising a good question about, trying to do too much and the need for priority and action. But I do think there is a key importance into opening up the discussion to look at maybe too much, because if we don't, then we're focusing on narrow solutions that are typically reinforcing past interests, past behaviors. For example, in the Caribbean right now, okay, around Puerto Rico, but not just Puerto Rico, the natural gas industry is seeing a gold mine. And you can argue whether there's a role for a certain level or not of investment, but there's a very concerted effort of saying, let's turn Puerto Rico into a hub, a regional hub for gas distribution and all that stuff. I understand it from their perspective, it makes a lot of sense. But if decisions are made and brushed ahead very quickly, then those things become entrenched for a generation. Just like if the next generation in the next 10 years of buildings are built with no consideration other than cost or this or that, we're entrenching technologies and energy use that's going to last 50 years. So there has to be a mixture of throwing the net wide in terms of thinking. Otherwise, we're gonna repeat narrow solutions. And it's not only an individual thing where smart people ended up thinking narrow solutions. Is that to repeat one of the quotes from that paper that I quoted? There are power imbalances out there. Solutions get implemented usually by those, either by large democratic decisions or narrower, powerful interests. That's the nature of reality, so that's as real as if we try to do too much, nothing gets done. So I think it's one has to look at it all.
Just to answer one specific question for you, City Albany has a program, in fact it's got a whole school on emergency management and so forth. I know because my college is in partnership with it. It also has student organizations like emergency response teams. Okay, you might want to look for that. Another way of doing this is that there are social organizations at the college. So Habitat for Humanity, for example, is one that helps in specific ways. And so I think there already exists at SUNY Albany a lot of opportunities for you to get the kind of training and the kind of ability to do these things depending on where your interests lie.
Just really quick, I wanted to chime in. Behavior change is the most difficult thing that has to happen. In social science, there's a great body of research on this, and especially when we're talking about communicating disasters. We can communicate, but for people to actually take action, it takes a shift in paradigm, right? We have to, as you said, things have to change from the core up. And that's what happened maybe in the case of Puerto Rico. So we were shook by what happened, and that's why communities then started to enact change, because government isn't doing anything for us. Neither the federal government or the local government. People were alone. So that's why communities started to be empowered. And in my case, right, my area of study, which is journalism and the press, this is why it is so important that we can get those stories out and amplify those people's voices. So help could get in the way, but really, if we, that's why we're having this conversation, because change is really, really hard for it to happen. But we need to be aware of these things and start changing ourselves.
The biggest problem that we are now facing in Puerto Rico, as we are, as you already know, a bankrupt country. We have been imposed a fiscal board that take all the important decisions regarding all the economic variables for Puerto Rico. And there, as the colleague said, there are powerful, narrow interests taking decisions for the people of Puerto Rico. They are now trying to sell our electric system and to make contracts in the long run for 20 to 30 years for natural gas. Why we don't use this opportunity that history gave us in terms of all the electric system went down? We can build it up both using natural natural sources of energy like the sun, like the wind. We are a tropical country. We have a lot of sun all over the year. So why those they don't give the opportunity of Puerto Rico, to make that change, so to a more resilient systems, because the way that they are planning to change our system is not the best for the people. It's the best for the private interests that are forcing that decision without consulting our people and our specialists. So that is a big problem.
Thank you so much. We are totally out of time. But I will give a last opportunity.
Thank you, everyone. This was a wonderful panel. My name is Megan Mackesy. I'm Assistant Professor of Communication. Therefore, I love talking about communication. I really believe it is the discipline that holds every other discipline and practice together. I was thinking about how last night in this room we were talking about the importance of moving from theory to practice. And I was sitting here listening to everyone's presentation and really enjoying them. But something was irking me, and it was, we're talking about bringing these partnerships together, bringing universities and communities and journalists together, and then how do we go, yes, that's great in theory, but how do we go to practice? And then Christine started talking about, I hadn't heard the quote before about selfishness, greed, and apathy, and I was like, yes, because yes, we're all here and we're here for this great reason, but we all have our own individual reasons for being here. I am selfish in my reason for being here and what I'm hoping to achieve. So I guess drawing back to this morning's panel on the new paradigm, can you all speak to, are we in a selfish paradigm, or how do we channel that selfishness to bring the theory of connectivity into practice? Thank you.
I mean, that's fantastic. I think everyone, what I've learned is that when the word climate change doesn't mean much to the regular Puerto Rican because it's not personal. You have to talk about jobs. You have to talk about their livelihood. You have to talk about their kids and their grandkids. And if there's one thing that I think we have failed at is being able to go from that big, massive concept to the heart of the matter and to the heart of what moves people. And we need to get really smart about it and fast, because that's how people move and how they change. You have to move people at the emotional level, but it's so much easier to talk about at the intellectual level, because that's it's more gratifying for our ego. It's easier to grapple with, but we need to get really smart about how to move at the emotional level. People, issues, and just make it really personal.
Well, just a little anecdote. When I started getting involved with this economic study of all this climate change impacts and all that, this is about 12 years ago. And the people who were working on this, there was a big divide between people say, oh, you got to work on mitigation of emissions, and some people say, well, we need to start thinking about adaptation because some things are going to just get too difficult. And no, don't talk about that too much because then it's going to keep energy away from reducing the emissions. One of the interesting things that has developed over time, and this ties to even this whole community thing, is that people there's a growing realization that those are not opposite things. There are people who have begun to work with communities, and not experts, I mean, there are experts, but they're not saying have the solution. Start working with the community over a period of time, looking at what challenges they're facing among these extreme phenomena, and having over time, having them participate with scientists and learn, gather the information, and think of what could be done and all that, and what is it going to cost. And what they're finding is that quickly they realize, wow, we need to do a lot, number one. Two, it's expensive. Not only is it expensive, if we don't do it, if we don't start doing it, it's going to get so expensive that we actually have to start focusing on mitigation. So the connection between what kind of action you take oftentimes gets more realistic and action-oriented by involving the communities. And that's an example. I mean, I've heard now multiple studies where they've done that. Experts, climate scientists, this and that, economists, working over a period of time with the community that's concerned about how we're going to deal with these things that are coming, because they see it in the news every day. And the more they own it by getting the experts and the information, they realize, we got to do it, it's going to be expensive, and we can't just do that, because otherwise it's going to cost more and more over time. So there's a way in which things loop, and information, good information from academia, involving those people processes does close the loop. So that's an example.
As a moderator, I will finish this session. Thank you so much. And I will give only 2 images from what I am doing to communicate research. And here you have on the right the symbol of theory of change, the scientific understanding, and totally related with when you are facing a crisis, you could reorganize your society. Then this is, for example, a paper that I use, and I work with communities and students, and we try to, by art, to transform this graph into ideas from children, people, etc. And for me, this is the most amazing experience that I have, to try to understand science by art or action with a lot of people and trying to understand what they would like to say, diversity, and all these kind of action could be very interesting. And I hope that all of us in this room will try to communicate risk in a better way for the future generation that are the most important people. Thank you so much.
People get rewarded.